Hello, everyone. I'm Yasmine Ergas. I am the chair, of the Women, Gender, and Global Affairs Network. I direct the Institute for the Study of Human Rights at Columbia University and also the Specialization on Gender and Public Policy at the School of International and Public Affairs of Columbia University. It's my very distinct honor to welcome you all today to this discussion on responding to the war in Ukraine, the impact of feminist foreign policies. I want to welcome you on behalf of Columbia University and also of our esteemed co-hosts, the Permanent Mission of Sweden to the United Nations and the Permanent Mission of Ukraine to the United Nations. Today's discussion promises to be, in my view, truly historic. And I am grateful to our co-hosts, to our co-sponsors, the permanent missions of Germany and Canada, UN Women, the Saltzman Institute of War and Peace Studies, the Harriman Institute, the International and Security Policy Concentration, and the Kent Global Leadership Program on Conflict Resolution at Columbia. I want to also give a special thank you to Anna Larsen from the Swedish Mission, to Jaskol Kochkarova and Arantzazu Jorkier Johnson, who work directly with me, and to all the experts who have participated in making today's event possible. Without you, surely we wouldn't all be here to have this important discussion. Since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, more than 10 million people, and even more, I think, have fled or become internally displaced. Hundreds, if not thousands, have been wounded and massacred. Families have been split. Basic services have been disrupted. And we watch what seems to be the daily and intentional commission of crimes, of international crimes of all stripes. So we listen to deeply shocking reports of massacres, of sexual and gender-based violence, including what seem to be episodes of genocidal rape and human trafficking. I can't begin to express my sorrow over the situation as it is unfolding today. Like all wars, this one too appears to be predicated on gender, conventionally mobilizing mostly men to the front, while assigning primarily to women and children to civilian quarters or to refuge abroad. Yet we also see how these gender distinctions are sometimes scrambled and being scrambled in Ukraine today, how the dissent in Russia often seems to involve women, how Ukrainian women are continuing to participate very actively, and I'm so grateful to them, in their country's public affairs and also taking up the defense of the country. What is happening today in Ukraine is having and will have immediate impact on the lives of millions. It is going to have long-term structural effects on Ukrainian society, the region, and globally. As we watch the militarization, the accentuated militarization of international affairs and the disasters of war unfold before our eyes, we have to ask, who is represented and what is discussed around the decision-making tables in military, political, humanitarian, and peace-building processes, which will be critical in determining whether the war's vast gender implications and implications for social equality more generally are taken into account. How will they be addressed? Our hope is that countries with a feminist foreign policy can play a vital role in addressing the war in Ukraine now as it unfolds, and also as we plan and hope for the next phase, which we hope will be a phase of peace and sovereignty for the country of Ukraine. It is our hope that such policies can not only forestall the inequities that this invasion exacerbates, but also support any positive gender dynamics. And I know that it's difficult to talk about anything positive emerging from war that may nonetheless emerge. In a time when foreign policies are being put to the ultimate test, which is the time of war. And I would like to add more than 20 years after the United Nations Security Council approved Resolution 1325, which inaugurated the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. How can feminist foreign policy countries act to ensure that gender is at the core of their response? To address these issues, I have an extraordinary panel, and I am so grateful to all our participants, all our speakers, for their willingness to be here, to take the time to have this conversation with us in a moment of such extraordinarily intense crisis, when I know that the calls on your time are immense and very urgent. And also because, as I know from all of your bios, everybody here has a long-standing commitment to the construction of peace and security, and also to gender equality issues. Our speakers today include Ambassador Karin Eneström, Permanent Representative of Sweden to the United Nations, Ambassador Sergi Kyslytsya, Permanent Representative of Ukraine to the United Nations, Commissioner Katerina Levchenko, Government Commissioner for Gender Policy in Ukraine, Ambassador Antje Lenderster, Permanent Representative of Germany to the United Nations, Assistant Secretary General and Deputy Executive Director of UN Women, Oja Regnier, Oksana Pokalchuk, Director of Amnesty International, Ukraine, and Oksana Potapova, women's rights and peace activist, feminist researcher, and co-founder of the Ukrainian NGO Theater for Dialogue. Our speakers need no further introduction, and I would like to just open it up for our conversation. So with that, let me invite Ambassador Eneström to start us off. Thank you.
Professor Yasmine, thank you so much, and my apologies for having some technical problems in accessing this meeting. I'm very grateful to you, to Columbia University, and to the co-host and co-sponsors for making this very important meeting possible. Mass displacement, indiscriminate killings of civilians, attack on civilian infrastructure, and shocking reports of sexual and gender-based violence and trafficking. The list of the unfolding horrors in the Ukraine war goes on. The unprovoked, unjustified, and illegal Russian aggression against Ukraine is having an immediate impact on lives of millions and going to have generational and structural impact of Ukraine's society, the region, and globally. Who is represented and what is discussed in response efforts will determine aspects of the war and whose needs and rights are addressed. These are highly gendered issues. We hear alarming messages about the vast protection concerns, acute disruptions to health services, including access to sexual and reproductive health and rights, lack of safe and accessible accommodations, basic necessities and financial support. These are some of the impacts of the war, impacts that disproportionately affect women and girls. Sweden's overall motivation for launching a feminist foreign policy in 2014 remains the same today. It is a recognition that systematic subordination and discrimination still mark the daily lives of women and girls around the world, and that this inequality becomes magnified in times of crisis and conflict. A feminist foreign policy sets out to address these inequalities and create societies where people of all genders have equal power to shape society and their own lives. We're very encouraged to see that since Sweden launched our feminist foreign policy, other governments around the world have done the same. Today, we are 8 countries, several of them represented here today. Let me stress 3 points on Sweden's foreign policy, Sweden's feminist foreign policy in response to the war in Ukraine. First, accountability must start now, not later. If we wait for verifications before we respond to the reported cases of sexual and gender-based violence and trafficking in persons, it will be too late. Survivor-centered prevention, responses to and accountability for efforts are needed now. Sweden is working together with civil society and UN partners to pursue gender-responsive monitoring of reported crimes. In addition, Sweden was one of the states that referred the situation in Ukraine to the International Criminal Court. We provide financial support and seconded personnel to the ICC. 2, we must focus on protection and participation at the same time. Women's participation in humanitarian, peace, and political processes is a matter of right and prerequisite for inclusive, lasting, and legitimate results. However, the deliberate and violent tactics for silencing women and feminist voices are many, in particular in time of conflict. This is why we must support protection and participation simultaneously. Sweden provides both humanitarian and long-term support. We are one of the largest humanitarian donors and provide support to, for example, Urgent Action Fund and the UN Trust Fund to end violence against women. And 3, we must defend the defenders. Women's human rights defenders, peace builders, and activists play a leading role in responding to the situation. Their voices must not only be defended, but they must also feed into policy and decision-making. Sweden continues to pursue consultations on a regular basis with affected women's rights and feminist actors in Ukraine, the region, and in Sweden. In addition, we focus on flexible and predictable funding, including core support, as it ensures that our partners have the flexibility and ownership to adapt to emerging needs. Sweden is the largest contributor to the UNFPA and UN Women, and we provide core funding to a number of civil society organizations in Ukraine. To conclude, let me stress a key approach that guides Sweden's feminist foreign policy work, including our response to the war in Ukraine. That is leadership. It is when those in leadership positions throughout the organization insist on including gender perspective that we see mainstreaming of gender across all activities and decisions. We have made all our ministers responsible for implementing the feminist foreign policy. I look forward to today's discussion, and it will be an opportunity to build on existing coordination between feminist foreign policy countries and to also hopefully inspire others to join in these efforts. And I thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. I want to mention also that I'm very grateful, I seem to have forgotten to say so, to the Permanent Mission of Canada for co-sponsoring and being with us today. So thank you. And I'd like to invite Ambassador Sergi Kyslytsya, the permanent representative of Ukraine to the United Nations, to address us now. Thank you so much, Ambassador.
Well, thank you very much, Yasmine, and thank you very much for pronouncing my last name, which is a very challenging thing to do, in fact, but you are doing great. Thank you very much. Distinguished colleagues and participants, Ukraine is pleased to be co-hosting this event with the Columbia University and Sweden, together with co-sponsors. Sweden was indeed the first country in the world to commit itself to a feminist foreign policy in 2014. Indeed, in doing so, Sweden started a trend among states searching for a common approach to foreign policy that prioritizes a feminist agenda involving gender equality, human rights, and peace. It's not by chance that I now speak about Sweden so passionately, because as the director for international organizations and later on as a vice minister, I've been dealing with the government of Sweden, with ambassadors of Sweden, with Anna, Karin, in fact, when she was visiting Ukraine, very successfully on the agenda of promoting women's rights. And also, I would like to say that I am a staunch supporter of feminist foreign policy, proceeding from the understanding that feminism is not a misandry. It's not against men. It's just to advance women's rights and to make, in fact, men's life even better if they are able to appreciate the core objectives of the feminist foreign policy. So now 8 countries, from what I know, have announced feminist foreign policies. Ukraine supports this endeavor and has made progress in promoting feminist approaches, as well as even as a country has been under attack since 2014 by one of the most anti-feminist world powers. The new wave of the Russian armed aggression in 2022 has clear colonialist, patriarchal, and sexist underpinnings. Its armed forces are committing the most serious crimes, including war crimes and crimes against humanity, as well as exploiting sexual violence in extreme forms. I'm grateful that the participants of today's discussion include a number of representatives of the United Nations and member states, as well as of civil society, because we need to efficiently coordinate our joint response in line with the feminist foreign policy approach to avoid reinforcing gender inequalities arising in the context of this invasion. Ukraine has been fortunate to be the recipient of the foreign policy initiatives of countries such as Sweden and in Canada, among others, that have done much to support women's empowerment and equal standing in Ukrainian political, economic, and social spheres. As the member of the UN Security Council at the birth of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 in 2000, Ukraine has implemented 2 successive national action plans since the beginning of the Russian aggression in 2014. Implementing policies on women's leadership in public service and in decision-making has made Ukraine stronger under pressure. Ukraine's armed forces are made up of 23% women, with nearly 1,000 women as senior officers. Within the diplomatic service, Ukraine has received a successful gender audit results on equal rights and opportunities. As one of the main follow-ups to the audit, Minister for Foreign Affairs Dmytro Kuleba 2 years ago announced internal feminization policy within the diplomatic service of Ukraine. Now, Ukraine has 14 women ambassadors, and women hold some of the highest positions of responsibility in Ukraine's government. The ongoing war has deeply gendered effects. Women, more specifically mothers and caretakers, and women and children are 95% of displaced. At the same time, it is women who are organizing the distribution of humanitarian supplies to the vulnerable groups throughout Ukraine, risking their lives while crossing lines of military engagement and using their voices to highlight the plight of the innocent. In addition, it is women who are volunteering at humanitarian hubs within Ukraine and at refugee centers in neighboring countries. Receiving countries which help Ukraine's displaced people should also exercise gender-sensitive and survivor-centered protection mechanisms and services to protect the human rights, dignity, and life opportunities of women and girls. For example, via immigration policies, social benefits, education, and health services. Aid procedures must ensure the representation and participation of women and girls in everything that concerns them. Especially victims of rape and other forms of violence need the assistance of all kinds, including help in properly documenting their cases for ICC. This requires a dedicated commitment to feminist and gender-responsive approaches and to pay specific attention to women's and girls' access to justice. We know that the inclusion of women in peace negotiations is key. Women, human rights defenders, peace builders, and other civil society actors are the ones who are most reliably documenting what is happening on the ground. Women must be a party to the political and economic decisions in post-war rebuilding of Ukraine. Their input will ensure that the perspectives and needs of the whole population are taken into account. I'm grateful for today's opportunity to share our experiences and exchange ideas. I hope our discussion will bring us closer to mutual understanding of our common agenda, and I look forward to continuing to explore concrete measures for an international feminist response to the invasion of Ukraine. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for that wonderful discussion and for the support for feminist efforts in addressing the foreign policy crisis of the moment. I'd like now to invite Ambassador Antje Lenderster, Permanent Representative of Germany to the United Nations, to speak to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, and all colleagues, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and especially the representatives from Ukraine that join us. Of course, I would like to thank first Sweden and Ukraine and the PRs, and as well as the Columbia University for organizing this very important webinar. I would also like to extend a special thanks to Government Commissioner for Gender Policy of Ukraine, Katerina Levchenko, from whom I had the pleasure of shortly meeting in person during the CSW in March. Of course, the situation in Ukraine is very daunting, and the Russian aggression has unbearable consequences on the lives of Ukrainians. And the humanitarian situation is deteriorating by the day. We have uncounted or still uncounted number of civilians that are killed, and millions have fled, as many other speakers have pointed out. But it's certainly true that women are first in line when it comes to shouldering egregious consequences of this war. And I had the opportunity to underline this fact at the Security Council last week, and I think it will be kept on the agenda here in New York in all relevant fora, including on accountability. Of course, the women now are the ones who are the main targets of conflict-related sexual violence, human trafficking, and sexual exploitations. There is not only the masses of women that are fleeing the country, but they also while they are in this vulnerable situation, they continue to take care of their family members, children, and elders. But where women stay behind, they are often in charge of providing either basic services to ensure the survival of families and communities while fear, mourning, and trauma prevail. But also there are, as Sergi Kyslytsya pointed out, they're also integrated in the combat forces. So I would like to say, because we are one of the newcomers in the feminist foreign policy since the new government took over, that it is for us certainly very kind of a case now to unfold every possibility, every option we have to support the implement the feminist foreign policy also in Ukraine, and to try to, as much as possible, to work together with the Ukrainian organizations and the government. Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock stated it in front of the German parliament, and you can see from my quote that it's still also an uphill battle in Germany itself, that feminist foreign policy is no knick-knack, but fit for our time. I think she, as a leader, and especially also this new government, knows that it is a time where we can no longer stay inactive in front of rape used as a weapon, as well as in front of other sexual and gender-based violence that continue to mark way too many conflicts, and of course, especially the war and the Russian aggression against Ukraine that we are facing now. So on a more general note, foreign policy must address these gendered dimensions of conflict to be more efficient. And in the case of Ukraine, it means that while we continue our efforts to stop this war, and we must have at the same time work equally hard to mitigate the immediate effects of the war on the Ukrainian people, including the specific hardships endured by women. Human security, solving the humanitarian crisis, addressing the profoundly gendered implications resulting from this conflict, these are not secondary considerations, they are central to our foreign policy decisions. That is why Germany's feminist foreign policy, like other feminist foreign policies, focuses on the famous 3 R's: rights, representation, and resources. First, on the rights issue. We must address violations where and when they occur. That means immediately, and that is particularly the case during war and conflicts, when women and girls are especially exposed to sexual and gender-based violence, to domestic abuse, to human trafficking. And since women are the most affected, we need to address their needs and rights through our policies. That is why it is key to take into account the gender dimension of this war in all accountability efforts. Mainly the work of the Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine, the Commission of Inquiry, and the independent investigation led by ICC prosecutor Karin, but also the work and very valuable work of the NGO and the civil society. Secondly, representation, the second R. Women have not only a right to be represented in all decision-making processes, but they also noticeably contribute to their effectiveness. This has been pointed out also by Karin and Sergi. And thirdly, resources. We really need to ensure that women have access to the means they need: finances, healthcare, education, to name just a few. But we also need to allocate enough of our own resources to promote gender equality. And this encompasses what Karin mentioned: defend the defenders, and enhancing the possibilities of the women on the ground to meet these needs, also through finances that are given by other countries and also feminist foreign policy oriented states. A fourth vital element of our feminist policy is, of course, the D for diversity, as it is not only about women, it's about inclusiveness as such. So equal rights, equal representation, and adequate resources for all those who are discriminated against, whether it's due to the gender, their origin, their religion or belief, their sexual orientation or identity, or to any other reason. And this is particularly relevant in security matters. If large parts of the population are unable to participate as equals, societies cannot reach their full potential. And I commend the words of Sergi Kyslytsya in pointing out the progress and the decisive steps, so 2 years earlier than us on the government level, to have a feminist foreign policy approach in the Ukrainian government. So societies cannot reach their full potential. We will not be able to achieve sustainable peace and security without this. Let me conclude by stressing that Russia's war against Ukraine is an attack on the Ukrainian people, but also on our rules-based international order, and has far-reaching effects across the globe. And we need a holistic security approach to respond effectively to this war. And this is what a feminist foreign policy is all about. Let's prove it by our actions, by taking concrete measures for women and girls in Ukraine, so that no one is left behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Lederste. And I really appreciate your call for a holistic security approach, and the feminist foreign policy approach that takes into account issues of diversity. I'd like now to ask Ambassador Richard Arbeiter, Deputy Permanent Representative of Canada, to address us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our thanks to Colombia, to Sweden, to Ukraine, and to all of the other co-sponsors for this event. Let me start, as always, by expressing, on behalf of my government and all Canadians, deep solidarity with Ukraine, with the people of Ukraine. We too have a feminist foreign policy. We continue to try to learn from Sweden and our partners. And I'm so delighted that this event is with Columbia University. And I'm hoping that there are a lot of students that are paying attention and tuning in to this, because the truth is we're all learning how to do it better. And I really look forward to hearing from those on the ground and hearing from others about how we can do so. Because for us, our feminist foreign policy and our feminist international assistance policy is about how you look at issues, how you think about issues, how you use gender-based analysis and gender-responsive actions in response to your understanding of events as they are occurring. We, of course, put gender equality at the center of our foreign policy and our international assistance policy. But as I said, we're trying to learn what that means in practice. And I thought I'd focus my remarks today in the first instance on what it looks like at the UN, and then secondly, what it looks like in terms of our support and partnership with Ukraine. So in practice at the UN, what do feminist actions look like? So I like to think about the UN in two different ways. First, intergovernmental processes, and then secondly, the UN system and the systemic response. On the intergovernmental processes, feminism, when you look at an issue through a feminist lens, you try to understand what are the systemic barriers or the structural barriers to action. Well, quite obviously, the UN Security Council is an anachronistic organization, and the structural barrier is the veto. The structural barrier to the maintenance of international peace and security is the veto. Canada, alongside a number of other countries, has supported successive moves from the Council into the General Assembly as a way to overcome the veto. So the 3 votes to date in the General Assembly and the one to come next Tuesday, which is essentially to create automaticity when the veto is used to refer a situation to the General Assembly, to me are inherently feminist moves. They are understanding that an organization that has a certain structure and a certain barrier that prevents it from meeting its obligations has to find a way around that. And I think it's really important for us to understand that kind of politically from that feminist lens. The ambassador of Sweden already referred to the ICC referral. Canada was also a part of that. We agree entirely on the need for early and immediate action. We have seen on accountability efforts across the world in the past that early is better and good. And so certainly from an intergovernmental perspective, we see that as a feminist action as well. Over the course of the CSW, we had the honor alongside Ukraine and Latvia and the Netherlands to convene an event, including with Governor Levchenko, who's on our call today, to try to create a platform within which the voices of individuals in Ukraine, women and men from the UN, from civil society organizations, from the government of Ukraine, could describe in real time what was happening. And that platform is absolutely essential to doing what Professor Ergas described as ensuring that those voices are amplified and are reaching as many people as possible. Now, from a UN systemic response perspective, in a certain sense, the UN is the global safety net for countries and communities that need support in times of crisis and times of conflict. I'm the child and grandchild of World War II survivors, of Holocaust survivors, of refugees to Canada at a time when there was no global safety net. Okay. And so when we think about our support to UNHCR, to UNDP, to all the instruments across the UN, it's really to ensure that the global safety net in support and in partnership with the government of Ukraine is doing its job. Now that safety net evolves over time. It's not a static thing, and it too needs to improve. And the way we feel it can improve is by understanding the differentiated impacts based on evidence and based on disaggregated data, disaggregated on the basis of gender, disaggregated on the basis of age and other vulnerability factors. So for us, in partnering with the UN system, and I think we'll hear from UN Women a little bit later and others, we were very glad to see the very rapid gender response from UN Women and from CARE and from others that were almost from the get-go understanding the gender dimensions of this conflict and building their responses by design to incorporate how those responses need to better meet the requirements of the individuals that were affected. Our international assistance in support of the UN, in support of the ICRC and other humanitarian actors, and in support of local NGOs on the ground has been very much in line with having that disaggregated, differentiated response. Some of the funding we provided has gone to support the Ministry of Social Policy of Ukraine and the the government gender commissioner who we have here to disseminate key messages on human trafficking, to provide information to those who need it so that they can make better decisions for themselves. Our funding has gone to UNFPA, to mobile teams to provide psychosocial support and set up safe spaces, crisis rooms, and shelters for women and girls across the country. We've provided support to the Ukrainian Women's Fund and others who are on the front line and who best understand the needs of the individuals in their community. Now, we have to continue to use this lens because unfortunately the conflict is nowhere near over and the Russian aggression continues to metastasize, as we've all seen. And so I hope that today we'll continue to learn from others about how we can use feminist understanding to improve the effectiveness of our response in partnership with Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Arbeiter. Thank you also for the discussion of institutional mechanisms, which, as we all know, are key to being able to deliver an effective feminist foreign policies. So I would like now to turn to our civil society speakers, and in particular to Oksana Pokalchuk, Director of Amnesty International in Ukraine. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much, dear webinar participants. It's a great honor for me to speak here and to talk about the situation in Ukraine and to raise the issue of the inclusion of women in different situations and at different stages that Ukraine is currently going through. What we are seeing in Ukraine now is horrible. Russia's war against Ukraine has affected absolutely everyone who lives in Ukraine or has relatives or friends there. It has also affected countries to which most women have fled from the war in Ukraine. In addition, it will affect a huge number of people who could potentially be left without food, as at least 30% of sown fields in Ukraine are now either under occupation or contaminated with mines, making it impossible to start sowing. The risk of running out of food will, of course, affect the least privileged and the poorest. Going back to the situation in Ukraine, murder, torture, rape, executions, living in occupation, intimidation, and the constant fear that a missile will kill your family and destroy the family home are just the tip of the iceberg of critical change that will have dire long-term consequences, both psychological and physical. And it is women who suffer uniquely and often disproportionately from any war. Many countries and organizations are now providing humanitarian assistance to Ukraine, and this is incredibly important. And at the same time, it is crucial to make sure that above all, women are involved in the decision-making process, both in the distribution of humanitarian aid between the regions of Ukraine and in the process of identifying needs for this aid from the ground. Unfortunately, I cannot say that with certainty that women are sufficiently involved in this process now, that their needs and voices are heard in making humanitarian aid decisions both outside and inside the country. Weapons, and especially indiscriminate weapons, affect above all the lives of civilians and especially the lives of civilian women, the poorest, rural women, women with disabilities, women with many children, and women living with poverty are the groups of women who are currently suffering from indiscriminate attacks by the Russian military in eastern and southern Ukraine. It is very important that countries that use feminist foreign policies in their work do everything possible to limit the supply of weapons and other components of the weapons to Russian Federation. The special place should be given to documentation of crimes, in particular war crimes. It is important to make sure that gender-based crimes, homo-, and transphobic crimes have the same attention and the same resources for investigating them as for other crimes. It is crucial that crimes that may not be detected immediately, such as crimes against sexual freedom or certain types of torture, be investigated over time. Remedies for survivors, their development and implementation should be a key issue, and women should play a key role in this. And of course, this disruption of decades of right-based work and available infrastructures created by feminist NGOs. Most of them are either in exile or completely shifted to the humanitarian assistance. It is unclear what the landscape will be, of course, but we already see that some of the groups are mobilizing in exile, and they will need support to provide services for rehabilitation of women and other vulnerable groups suffering from trauma and gender-based violence connected to war. Concluding my speech, I would like to say about the urgent need for greater visibility of women's participation in various processes. Women work. They do hard work every day, but they are not visible. They must have a worthy and meaningful place at the negotiation table at all stages. Visibility of women's work will have positive impact both on significant issue of aid development and in empowerment of other women protecting their needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. And of course, I agree with everything that you have said. I especially want to stress the issue of the visibility that recognizes what is in fact the work that women are doing, and that we need to highlight that and to preserve the space for civil society organizations, which means actually to support them. So with that, I would like now to turn to Oksana Potapova, who is a women's rights active and peace activist, feminist researcher, and co-founder of Theater for Dialogue in Ukraine. Thank you so much for being with us. We know how embattled you must be.
Thank you, everyone, and greetings. It's a great honor to be speaking at this panel, and I thank all of my colleagues for giving such an detailed account of the situation in Ukraine. Ambassador Kyslytsya, Oksana Pokalchuk, and some of the remarks that I make will not repeat the data and the effect that this war is having on Ukraine. But I will try to speak to the aspects that were also raised by colleagues from Sweden, Canada, and Germany, and try to ask the following question with my intervention. When we speak about feminist approaches or gendered approaches to policies, to foreign policy, to local decision-making, often the question we ask, and I think the question we are asking now as well, is where are the women? And it's an important question. And I agree with Oksana that unfortunately at some levels of decision-making right now, we are not seeing women enough included and represented in Ukraine, as local decision-making processes have become more centralized and less consultations, less civil society participation is there. And we understand that these are the moments of wartime and the policies of wartime, and we want to keep pushing for this not to become the norm. However, the question I want to ask, and I keep asking myself, is what is feminist about policies? Which to me is a different question than just asking about where the women are. And trying to bring together my activist background and a little bit of my academic background, as well as an understanding of what is going on. I want to share this perspective that a feminist approach, again, as my previous colleagues have mentioned, is the one that looks at systemic and structural inequalities, at structural barriers, and aims to transform power relations rather than just equate men and women where they are unequal right now. It looks at the roots of inequality. What this means for Ukraine and for the situation in Ukraine is also multifold. including the way Ukraine is calling on the world to respond to this war, instead of just inviting us to sit together with Russian civil society or Russian activists and have a dialogue. We want to acknowledge the imbalance of power relations in this war between Russia and Ukraine, and also historically between our nations, which is important to understand if we want to bring a transformative solution to this war and not only end the immediate violence without preventing future conflicts. And those of you who have worked and experienced effects of colonization and politics of imperialism and settler colonialism will understand what I'm referring to. And again, Ambassador Kyslytsya also mentioned this. It is important for us as feminist and cultural activists to bring out this dimension of this conflict at the level of discourse, at the level of analysis, at the level of representation as well. Some of us are choosing to intervene with our academic work or with our political positions. But again, power relations must be at the root of understanding why this war is taking place and how it can end, which is by supporting Ukraine in this resistance. Not only the consequences of this war must be supported, but also the end to this war must be supported with arms to Ukraine. This is my personal feminist and activist position, and I know it is shared by many. And yes, my title includes peace activism. And until February 24th, I was an active advocate of nonviolent approaches. I have been involved in dialogue in communities and looking for solutions to transformative peace in Ukraine, hoping that we can still achieve it. Right now, to me, this is no longer an illusion that we can just negotiate and just agree on peace. We must have a transformative solution, including systemic ones through the UN that were already mentioned. Because again, to me, it is a feminist approach to violence, which we know from our activism in gender-based violence, that violence needs to be stopped as soon as we can. We cannot only deal with supporting the survivors. We cannot only talk about providing services or recording the crimes. We must make sure that violence is stopped and the roots of this violence are analyzed. What feminist analysis also brings is an understanding of embodied positionality. There is a famous saying that the personal is political. We know it and we bring it to our marches. Famous academic researcher and activist Sara Ahmed takes it forward by saying the personal is also theoretical. And I say that the personal is also international. And here I agree with Oksana again, and I see that I will be wrapping up, that we must center voices of Ukrainian activists and Ukrainian civil society, both in international discourse about Ukraine, recognize the multiple roles that women are playing, and recognize the agency of civil society on the ground, and provide direct assistance to civil society by avoiding whatever possible bureaucratic, large, systemic barriers to access. Because the reality is that apart from being heavily affected, women are also responding to this war in Ukraine and internationally in multiple roles and at different levels that need to be recognized as agentic and need to receive appropriate support. Thank you very much.
I want to thank you very much, Oksana, for that intervention. I think that you've brought to us a dimension of activism on the ground and a call to theory as well as to institutional analysis that's extremely important. And I hope that we will be able to continue this conversation. I'd like now to call on Assistant Secretary General and Deputy Executive Director of UN Women, Oja Regnier, to speak to us. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Yasmine, and thank you, Excellencies, guests, friends, partners, colleagues, everybody who've been speaking before me and everybody who will speak here. And I want to especially acknowledge, of course, the ambassador to Ukraine, the UN ambassador to Ukraine, as well as my colleague and good friend Katarina Levchenko, who is the Commissioner for Women's Rights from Ukraine, as well as all colleagues and friends from Ukraine civil society, including those who are on this panel today, as well as to the member states who are organizing this, the permanent mission of Sweden, Ukraine, Canada, Germany, and the University of Columbia. I think it is really important that we do whatever we can together in this situation. Soon, as many of you pointed out, it will be 2 months since the Russian aggression on Ukraine started. And as we speak, the humanitarian situation in Ukraine is very bad and deteriorating. Women and girls are paying a heavy price right now, although it is also not a good situation for boys and men. I want to thank those who mentioned UN Women's work in Ukraine already, and I want to point out from the outset that obviously we are really trying to do a good and relevant job there, but whatever we do is always based on discussions, dialogue with both the government of Ukraine, as well as with civil society and the extremely courageous, hard-working and determined feminist representatives of organizations there. We have published already a rapid gender analysis that was now, I think it's about 3-4 weeks ago. And we have another one coming out next week because we think it is very important to describe the situation, how it unfolds. We think it's very important to use the data that we can collect together with CARE International to describe women's and girls' situations and role right now in Ukraine. And as our colleagues from civil society pointed out, we see already that Ukraine, a country that was making steady progress towards gender equality, is now facing a serious risk of setback in many ways. And obviously we see the immediate and severe gender implications of the war. For example, we have information about women limiting their food intake in order to save and support their children and other vulnerable members of their households. So women stand back because of there. We also heard already that there is limited access to reproductive health, maternal health, etc. And this has led to an increase in the number of premature births and the risks that come with that. We know also that access to employment obviously has dramatically decreased for both women and men all over the country. And this has an impact especially on women because women's incomes are lower. And we knew that 72% of those who needed social assistance already were women. So this is just one figure to explain why this hits women in another way than men. Also, we do see mounting allegations of trafficking and gender-based and sexual violence against women and girls, those leaving the country, perhaps most of all, but also those who are in the country. Prevention and accountability for these crimes are critical, and UN Women and other UN entities are working together to address the needs of Ukrainian women and girls arriving as refugees, for example, in neighboring countries. We're also working together with the EU, for example, to try to mitigate the risk of trafficking and other forms of sexual exploitation. UN Women is also deploying experts or have deployed experts to as investigators to the UN Commission of Inquiry for crimes in Ukraine that many of you mentioned. But despite all of this, we do see, as we already saw, formidable examples of that women and girls are at the forefront of the response. They are leaders right now, as they are always. And in the rapid assessment of the conflict that we already published, we actually saw that more than 90% of women's NGOs which were part of that survey were actually remaining functional at a very high cost for themselves, obviously, and with fear for their lives, but they are still providing life-saving support to their communities. To us, they've also been very keen from the beginning to point out the needs of elderly women, women who themselves have disabilities, for example, or who might have children with disabilities, and or for other reasons are not very mobile. I see now that this comes out in media pieces, but civil society was very early to point that out to us as one example of both their super important role as well, informing the rest of the world, but also those who are actually literally concretely reaching out to others with needs. And they keep doing so, even though some are being directly targeted. Unfortunately, we have those reports for their active role through media or as NGO representatives, because we have recent reports of kidnappings, murders, and gender-based violence against civil society activists, human rights defenders, and women journalists. So I want to say to you, those who are here today from civil society and representing in other ways the defense of women's rights in Ukraine today, that we are very impressed by your resilience and strength, and we are here to support you. We try to support through the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund, which was also mentioned before, where we mobilize support to ensure resources for CSOs so that they can continue the work. And obviously the rubric today is feminist foreign policies, which is policies that member states can decide that they want to work by, and they do play a critical role. We do see that. The war is taking a very heavy toll on women and girls, but we also need to see them as the leaders they are and that they have the right to be. And they do play a critical role in the defense and recovery of the country. So member states with a feminist foreign policy need, as the German PR pointed out, to work with those 3 R's, not least resources, to support this incredibly important work, which is also about deciding the future of the country. As we heard, we already see that women are underrepresented in crisis response, and sometimes also in UN humanitarian operations. And we can do more to ensure that gender analysis is central to very important decisions. So UN Women is also part of humanitarian response, influencing different clusters in that work. We think that for all of us, for UN Women and for the UN as such, we need to work both understanding women's needs and their analysis about the needs, but also supporting them in their role right now and in the role in a future Ukraine. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much for discussing with us the very, very important role of UN Women, which is also, I think and hope, a role of sort of a propulsive role, an active role, and also a role of coordination and consolidation of a variety of efforts. I'd like with that to now turn to Government Commissioner for Gender Policy of Ukraine, Kyslytsya. I'm so pleased that you are here with us today, and I hope that our discussion will be useful to your work. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving the floor. I hope you hear me well. Yes? Yeah, okay. So, and thank you, distinguished organizers, for inviting me to share my thoughts, my vision of the impact of feminist foreign policy and its meaning for Ukraine. And dear participants, you know that Ukraine is living now through very dark time, and your solidarity with the Ukrainian people, your support, political, military, financial, humanitarian, and even emotional, is very important for us. And I want to express my gratitude to all governments, all countries, international and non-governmental organizations, business, citizens of many, many countries for your real support, which gives us the opportunity to believe in our victory in this injustice and unprovoked war of Russia against Ukraine. Moreover, not only against Ukraine, against values of democracy, freedom, human and women rights, which are been shared by majority of UN members. The figures of suffering is really very high. We have 4.5 million Ukrainians abroad, and around 7.5 million Ukrainians as internally displaced people within Ukraine. And that's already stressed by our Honorable Ambassador Sergi Kyslytsya. Majority among them are women and women with children. And the existing situation pushes us to elaborate and use effective response in humanitarian assistance and in development. Response which is based on the modern principles of human rights, gender equality, and women rights. And when I'm asking myself, what does feminist policy mean, especially in the context of full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, I think about changing the standard approaches and frames of developing, implementing, and monitoring and political process at all levels, at all spheres, including international technical assistance, financing, and coordination. And I really support all statements which were done by Oksana Potapova about necessity of feminist approach in developing of modern and effective policy. And according to my vision, the feminist policy is wider than just gender mainstreaming itself. Without any doubt, gender mainstreaming is a very important tool which gives opportunity to use gender lens, gender-oriented action as gender-oriented budgeting, for example, gender disaggregated indicators at the stages of programming and implementation of the policy. And we actively use and promote such approach in Ukraine in activity at the governmental level, at level of local administration, and as example of just such gender mainstreaming is including gender approaches in activity of all central executive bodies, not only one responsible body as Ministry of Social Policy of Ukraine, but everybody who involved in developing policy in its sphere. But feminist policy includes not only like gender mainstreaming as an important principle. Among such principles, I also want to mention such as trust, women participation, coordination, and some others. When I'm indicating trust as a principle of feminist policy, it's first of all about cooperation of international donors and organizations with local and national women's NGO, and inviting experts from local authorities. We really want to see more local people in the strategizing process of big international projects. We have a very positive example, Women Voice and Leadership Ukraine. It is a 5-year program which is being implemented by Ukrainian Women Fund, already mentioned by the Ambassador of Canada. And this project is implemented with support of government of Canada as a part of Canadian feminist policy. Implementing of the principles of UN Security Council Resolution 1325 is in the center of this project, which makes it very actual today in this situation of full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. Next important principle is meaningful and effective women participation at all stages, especially in decision-making process. And we have some positive examples at national level of women participation in the process of developing strategic documents on gender equality, such as already mentioned National Action Plan on implementation 1325 Security Council resolution, or the draft of a National Gender Equality Strategy. It was ready just before this full-scale invasion, and we expect that it would be approved by government at the beginning of March. It didn't happen, and nevertheless, we consider that such strategy, after updating, will be adopted by the Ukrainian government. And the process of involvement of non-governmental organizations in the development of strategic documents, it is our common actions and policy together with UN Women, which supported by embassies of Sweden and Canada in Ukraine, other international organizations. And we also see at the moment necessity of updating ongoing National Action Plan on 1325. It was adopted in 2020. I cannot tell you that 2020 it was a peaceful time, because war started in Ukraine not in February 2022. It started in 2014. But it should be updated in the light of this full-scale invasion and its horrible consequences for Ukrainians, especially women and children. We have started already this discussion together with women non-governmental organizations, and we will continue our practical steps based at the needs assessment. One more important principle of feminist policy for me is flexibility in program implementation, like quick response, taking into consideration actual needs of women and girls. As example of such principles, the programs of emergency grants, which already have demonstrated its efficiency in a catastrophic humanitarian situation in Ukraine now. The last but not least, cooperation and transparency. Cooperation between government, international, non-governmental organizations at national level and at grassroots level as well. Good example from Ukrainian practice, Commission on Gender Equality under leadership of Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine on European and Euro-Atlantic integration. Or sectoral working group Gender Equality as a part of the national architecture of international technical assistance coordination as a platform for coordination and sharing information between development partners, government institutions, international and non-governmental organizations. After the last meeting earlier this April, we collected needs from all central executive bodies and local administrations for their effective response on conflict-related sexual violence. which can be used by donors in developing their quick response in situation of war. And we also see the necessity of strengthening cooperation at international level as well to support Ukraine and Ukrainian women. Platform of solidarity with Ukrainian women is our common initiative with UN Women. And thank you, Ambassador Richard Arbuiter, Deputy Permanent Representative of Canada to UN, for support this idea. And I urge all participants, representatives from countries, governments, international and non-governmental organizations to support this initiative as an important part of feminist response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Thank you for your attention. And one more time, thank you for your support and for our common efforts to stop this war and to win this war.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Commissioner Levchenko. I think that we're all with you, especially when you lay out the principles of a feminist foreign policy. And it has been said many times, I think, this morning, that this is not as important as it is to center women. It is actually about the broader principles that underlie a progressive and transformative foreign policy, so that we don't retrogress in a moment of such terrible crisis, but also so that we can build better, we can build going forward. And I appreciate everything that has been said that goes in that direction. What I would like to do now is to open to questions to our Q&A session. And I would like to sort of start by talking with a question for all of our panelists, excuse me, which is, we've heard about a whole variety of different issues and of approaches. But when we try to identify the issues that are of particular concern in the moment, and that may be extremely difficult to do, I think that for every speaker and for all participants, generally, there are a variety of issues that become more or less salient at different moments. But I'm thinking of the burdens of care in the immediate and in the long term. I'm thinking about the risks that are associated with trafficking, with the violence that is visited on women and children, but is also visited on men who are also, as we know, victims of war violence, and they're also victims of sexual violence in conflict. How can we best try to coordinate efforts to address these issues? Is that even an issue that you would like us to be discussing? How can we do that? And I'm very mindful of the role that UN Women has played and is continuing to play in addressing the conflict in a sort of general perspective. But that's a question I'd like to ask the panelists, and please, for whoever wants to take it first. Commissioner Levchenko, you've come onto my screen, so I'm not sure if that's, if you're wanting to address this question, or. So the question is, how can we address and coordinate the variety of issues that have come to the fore and that are coming to the fore?
Yeah, okay, let me start. It's really like a very complicated issue, because I absolutely agree that we have to stop violence, we have to stop war, but nevertheless, already today we have to think about our future step and about rebuilding our country, rebuilding indirect sense of this word, and rebuilding speak about like relationship, and we also and we of course want to see our Ukrainian people who back home from foreign countries, of course, the country today. So, and of course, it is important to incorporate this principle of non-discrimination and gender equality in all program and policies. And yes, it is important. About visibility of women in decision-making process. It's okay. I hear very often that this question why Ukraine doesn't have women or women at the table, for example, in Istanbul, yes, and during this negotiation with Russian Federation. Of course, as government commissioner, I want to have and to see women and women at all levels. But I also consider that we shouldn't like simplify this issue, because if you look at decision-making process in Ukraine at high political level, you will see a lot of very strong women who involved in this process. Among 4 deputy prime ministers, they have 3 female deputy prime minister on European and Euro-Atlantic integration, on reintegration, and on economical issue, general prosecutor of Ukraine, ministers of social policy, minister on veteran affairs. So I do not want to continue because it will be quite long list, but I absolutely agree with Oksana that it is necessary to strengthen visualization of women participation in decision-making process, which is very important, and which will create real picture of this further development of our country. And of course, more women at local level as well, where women are really very active. And the last point, strong cooperation with civil society and with non-governmental organizations. It is a principle in the Ukrainian policy, and not only when we speak about development strategy and document on gender equality, we have also a lot of examples of such cooperation in other spheres, and we have to continue this very positive dynamic which was started before full-scale invasion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I would like to ask Olga Regnier to please speak.
Thank you so much. And we want to listen to our Ukrainian colleagues, but I just wanted to support something that Ms. Litchenko said earlier. I think that one way of trying to tackle the multitude of terrible things that are happening, but still safeguard and promote rights, is the platform that you mentioned for women's rights in and outside of Ukraine right now, together with member states, with international organizations, with the obviously initiative of the government of Ukraine together with us. And so I think that is one forum where we could continue that discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And that's extremely important. I'd like to call on Ambassador Eneström, please.
Thank you very much, Yasmine. And let me first thank our Ukrainian sisters for all the information and for the very good discussion. And of course, my colleague Sergi, whom I worked with for such a long time, also when it comes to gender issue. I just wanted very briefly to support what Commissioner Litchenko said about that we need to do several things at the same time. I mean, there is an acute humanitarian situation. There are acute risks, not only to women and children, but maybe mostly to women and children, but also to others. And we need to reach them. The humanitarian access is, of course, key. And we need to prevent that further crimes are being committed, and we need to work with accountability for those crimes that have been committed. But we also need at the same time to to look at the more long term, as the commissioner very much emphasized. We need to work with strengthening the structures, those things that we worked with Ukraine for such a long time, but also to widen and strengthen the space for non-governmental organizations and other issues. So I think that this is something that the international community is not very good at. It doesn't only go for Ukraine, it goes for other situations as well, that we really need to be able to work on the humanitarian front, on the protection front, but also on the more long-term visions and support. And the last thing I wanted to say is that, and I think Åsa mentioned this, of course, everything we do, we need to do with Ukraine. We need to do in coordination and cooperation with Ukraine. And when it comes to the cooperation and coordination, of course, the UN Women and the UN system is key. And I just want to take this opportunity to really thank Åsa and especially her colleagues in the field in Ukraine and other situations, because they're doing, of course, a fantastic job there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And I would like to call on Ambassador Kyslytsya, please.
Well, thank you very much. Thing is that 193 countries that represent the UN community, they also have photo picture of the world. And one of the drawbacks of dealing in such a representative community is that oftentimes we have to water down the principles, the standards, the ideas. Therefore, to advance women's rights and feminist policy in the General Assembly here in New York is not the same thing as to advance it in Sweden or in Ukraine or in the Council of Europe, for that matter, you know. On the other hand, the war against Ukraine launched a new dynamic in the General Assembly. And I can say with all responsibility that when I meet ambassadors from very distant countries, even from, for example, I had a meeting with one Caribbean ambassador yesterday. And one of the things, believe it or not, he was discussing with me how his country can advance fighting human trafficking and trafficking in women and girls in the context of the war in Ukraine. And I was so surprised to sit with him for half an hour and to listen to him how his country is genuinely interested in advancing this policy. So I think that for tragic reasons, we are now in a unique moment where countries that are culturally, politically, geographically are very far away from Ukraine are willing to revisit their traditional attitudes and policies towards women's rights and towards what we do here. And that is quite encouraging. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, because I think it's really important to bear in mind the difficulties of effective multilateralism as we talk about the crisis in Ukraine, in particular, in respect to the question of advancing women's rights. I'd like to note also that it seems to me that the entire 1325 agenda has to be taken into account when we're thinking about our approaches, which includes issues that were mentioned here today earlier of sexual and reproductive health and rights, questions that have to do with trafficking and also with burdens of care and burdens of war and military action. I think that one of the open questions from an academic perspective, if you like, if that's a legitimate perspective to take in this context, is how the war in Ukraine is reorganizing and will reorganize global alliances and global, sort of basically global politics, both generally on the question of Ukraine specifically, and then in particular on the question of gender and gender rights. And that is actually a concern of mine, and I'm sure of many people here. I'm extremely encouraged by the importance that all of our panelists, and I'm especially very, very grateful to Ukraine and to Sweden for its leadership role, and to all of our co-hosts and co-sponsors for recognizing the general importance of feminist foreign policies, and generally, I would say, of imbuing a feminist sensibility and a gender sensitive lens into social policies more generally. We are at closing time. We could go over a little bit longer for those who wish to stay. And I guess speaking as or from Columbia University, my question to all of you then would be, in such an esteemed panel of persons who are really directly implicated in one way or another in the development of the policies and in their implementation, what do you see as the role that academia can play? I'd like to know how we can be helpful and how we can work together going forward. So, very grateful for any suggestions. Yes, Ambassador, Ambassador Linderstay.
Thank you. Thank you. I apologize for my last name is Sergi Kyslytsya as well, but I just wanted to raise the issue, and it comes from also Commissioner Levchenko's remarks on the 1325 and the WPS agenda that has to be followed, of course. I mean, if you look, for example, at this resolution 2467, where there is a big focus on survivor-centered approach. Without academia, and let's face it, also without the activists and the civil society organizations, feminist organizations, I don't think this would have been fed in as a principle into the work of the member states, and then not into the work of the UN body Security Council, and it's now all over the place in CSW, and it's a kind of accepted answer we have as international community, you know, and a practice or that has concrete influence then also on the projects and the resources that are given, and where is the policy energy led to, and where is the money led to. So I think you can see that the academia, for example, in analyzing and to help us understand the gender dimensions of war in this case. I mean, if you do your work on this, and of course helped by the civil society organization, I think we can act also better. Sometimes it's very slow how this is introduced, but I echo others that have been pointing to the fact how important it is to integrate academia and civil society organizations in our work, because in the end, we will put into a position where we can work better and adapt policies. I mean, if you look at the research in Bosnia in the past, for example, I mean, this was leading to conceptual tools that have been concretely applied by the international organizations and of course member states, and also national action plans of Germany. If you would take the national action plans all over the world on 1325, you could see that there is a mutual influence, and there is something to be learned all together on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. And so then I have Oksana Potapova, please, and followed by Commissioner Levchenko.
Thank you, and thank you as well for pronouncing my last name with the stress on the right word. It's such a nuances, but it seems like it's a running thread for us today. I will try to briefly comment on your last question, but also mention in it also the response to the previous one on what the current war in Ukraine could mean for global security infrastructure. my engagement with feminist scholarship as well, and women, peace and security, as well as my activism, centered around the concept of human security as a feminist invitation to broaden our understanding of security altogether, and to not only focus on militarized state security, but also on security as it is experienced directly by women and other marginalized groups. And I think even though today we advocate for an armed response in Ukraine much stronger, the call for centering human security stands very much, and it becomes central. And my colleague Alexandra Matviichuk very recently addressed the OSCE in also bringing up this issue and saying that because we have missed the importance of human rights, because we have overlooked the violations and gendered inequalities in Russia, we have not considered enough how these aspects then play into the larger regional security issues. And so I think this is where feminist scholarship and feminist activism can bring an immense contribution to future definitions of security. And the second aspect, which we're also seeing very strongly, and again, there's already research on this, is the aspect of care that you mentioned, which is being integrated into WPS policies. There is a fabulous research by Swiss Peace and the co-foundation titled No Care, No Peace, where this care role of women in building peace and also in taking up care for vulnerable, for children, is centered in how we respond to the economies of after war, how we respond to infrastructure. And the question I'm asking myself, and I hope maybe that also scholars and activists together can answer, is what does the economy of care look like in countries that are rebuilding after war, in countries that are rebuilding after COVID, in countries that are looking at the importance of care work? And final remarks is that I encourage you to invite Ukrainian scholars to be speakers at events. We have immense scholarship, feminist professors, and very intelligent feminists who can speak from the first experience. And this is the time to make them visible and make them heard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oksana. And of course, we want to invite Ukrainian academics, speakers, researchers, and civil society, as well as governmental representatives. Commissioner Levchenko, please. And then I'm afraid we're going to have to conclude because we've really gone over, and unless anyone wants to make some final remarks, which I would of course be very happy for.
Thank you. And it looks like after Madam Ambassador, German Ambassador's response and Oksana Potapova's response, I just have to make some conclusions, because I also consider that it is very important to integrate as much as possible both academia and non-governmental organizations, the policy development process at international level and the local level as well. And I also consider that cooperation with Ukrainian scientists, Ukrainian female scientists and feminist scientists, it's a very important step, and it will be a very wise step. And it will be not only like support to those Ukrainian scientists who do not have job today because their universities and centers destroyed and bombed by Russians, but because you really need, as academicians, you really need to more about Ukraine and different aspects. And please, when you create sites like Ukrainian studies or centers on the Ukrainian, really involve as much as possible Ukrainian specialists. Nothing for us without us. This feministic principle should be used at academician level as well. And thank you very much for this very intensive and productive discussion.
Thank you so very much. And I'd like to ask whether Ambassador Kyslytsya or Ambassador Eneström or our other participants would like to make some final remarks before we close.
The only thing I would like to say that nothing happens in the United Nations overnight. And we have to be very resilient and patient, and we have to move in the right direction step by step, and we should not be discouraged that unlike the national level, we can't achieve many things overnight. But otherwise, thank you very much for being part of this event today, and a special thanks to the organizers and our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Ambassador Eneström?
Yeah, can I just follow up on Sergey's remark, and I'm really very encouraged by the discussion. I'm especially encouraged from what we've heard from the civil society, from the commissioner, and from our friends and sisters in Ukraine. And I think that the courage that we are seeing there is very encouraging for our future cooperation when it comes to supporting a feminist foreign policy and a strong gender equality work in Ukraine. You have come very, very far, and we will do whatever we can do to not let this war backtrack on your progress. So I'm really encouraged by this discussion, but I think it's very right what Sergi said, that this is long term, and that means that we need to continue to discuss this issue and see how we can further support, both when it comes to the short term humanitarian, but also for the long term. Thank you very much, and thanks to you, Yasmine, for bringing us together. It's been a very, very, very worthwhile hours to spend together with all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you to everybody. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you again to our co-hosts and co-sponsors. I hope that we will have the opportunity to continue this discussion and to talk about concrete measures more specifically. So thank you once again. For all of the Columbia students, we will be holding a debriefing session to discuss the discussion today. And I look forward to seeing you all again. Thank you.